This is my 2006 Bluebird Vision with a Cat C7 engine, air ride and air brakes. I bought it in September of 2023 for the low price of $2,500 and I'm going to convert it into my own personal permanent home. It may seem cliche, but when I first started this project, I had expectations of how this project may go. Let me tell you, this was very different from what I expected. When you watch videos of people doing bus conversions like I have, there are a lot of details that most seem to gloss over. And so, when I made the spontaneous decision to document my journey converting my own bus, I decided that I wanted to show the things that no one else seems to. I don't have the best video equipment or the highest level of editing proficiency, so I'm honored that you chose to take the time to watch my silly little channel, and I hope you enjoy every minute. I started off by grinding off any screws or nails that were sticking out with the cutoff wheel on my grinder. As I did this, I ran my hands over the floor to catch any screws that I missed, and as I found them, I'd take them off. In some spots, there were remnants of the plywood still stuck to the floor, so I removed them with a hammer as I came across them. I switched from a cutoff wheel to a wire wheel, though for reasons that I will explain shortly, this didn't last long. A lot of this rust was fairly flaky, so I used a hammer to kind of break it free. After that, I swept up the floors to make it easier to see what I needed to grind off. I ended up switching from a wire wheel over to a grinding wheel because some of the rust was so badly kicked on that I was wearing through the wire wheel too quickly. You may have noticed that I am wearing safety goggles and a dust mask. I'm grateful that I had the foresight to do this because my lungs would have been brown from all the rust dust hanging in the air from this. Here are some of the holes in the floors that I uncovered by removing the rust. They were pretty bad, and I did end up addressing this in a later video. As I did this job, I got more and more into a rhythm, and even though this was a very messy, dirty job, I found myself somewhat enjoying it. This was still fairly early on in the project, so I was experimenting with cameras and angles and whatnot, so this is me trying out a chest cam. I ended up not liking it very much. Not only was the footage shaky, it was also very uncomfortable to wear and work in for any period of time. So I got to this point in the process, and because the floor was in such poor condition, I decided that I would have to remove the plywood from the driver area. To do that, I needed to remove the 2 heaters and a bunch of the plastics. As I started on this, I just decided to rip out the entire front dash of the bus and redo it, because then I could build it to my liking. I started by removing all the junk out of the way. Next, I removed the switch panels. I removed whatever I didn't need and kept what I wanted to keep. Now it says on this sticker, shock hazard 120 volts AC, so that meant that I had to disconnect the batteries. There are 3 of them, and as you can see, they're pretty hefty. One of them was in bad shape and was in need of replacing, so this had to be done anyways. Once the batteries were out, I went back to removing the switch panels. These switches, while easier to remove than some car switches, were still a bit of a pain, and I ended up having to cut some stuff out. I'm pretty sure there's a special tool to do this, but I didn't have it, and I wasn't keeping most of this anyways, so it didn't matter all that much to me. Next, I removed the panel with the radio head unit in it. This also housed the switches for all the flashers, which I wouldn't be using anymore, so I pulled everything out. I kept the windshield wiper switch, of course. It never ceases to amaze me at the stuff I found in this bus. This glove compartment had all sorts of fun items like face masks, pens and pencils, and a jar of student snot. Yep, that's a thing apparently. At this point, I removed the plastic housing for the side switch panels. This was surprisingly easy to do. All I had to do was remove a bunch of screws and out it came. I also found this random vape pod. An odd thing to find on a bus, but then again, actors did ride on this thing, so I removed the support structure for the heater. At this point, I wasn't quite sure how to get the heater out, so I was just removing anything that looked like it was attached to it in the hopes that I'd figure it out eventually. I ended up putting that on hold and instead focused my attention on the glove box. Of course, it was full of all sorts of crap, most of which I threw out. I removed this panel, which I quickly discovered was an access panel for the windshield wiper motor. I did have to disconnect the plugs from it because they were in the way, but I did end up putting it back together when I was done. There was a lot of support structure in behind these plastics, and it was a bit of a puzzle to get it all out. I then removed the heater blower, which was housed in this plastic shroud. One of the cool things about this generation of Bluebird buses is that they have a small window down by the door. I assumed this was so that the driver could see the kids as they were walking around the bus, and it had this cool film on it that obscures the interior of the bus while allowing people to look out of the bus. This here is the cover for the main electrical system on the bus. I didn't want to remove this, but I didn't really have a choice because it was over top of a metal plate that sat on top of the flooring. Of course, nothing ever comes out easy, and this metal plate was no exception. I grabbed the grinder and ended up cutting off the heads of the screws holding it in. Yeah, that one hurt. Nothing like a crowbar in the leg. After that, I removed the valve handle that controls the coolant to the driver's side heater. Next, I started to remove the heater. I quickly found out that the heater housing wasn't fastened to the floor at all, which meant that all I had to do was remove the screws from the top and it slid right out. The radiator hoses were still connected, of course, so I slid out the heater core from the heater housing, which allowed me to remove the housing altogether. Next, I disconnected the core from the coolant hoses, cut them shorter, looped them around, and reconnected them. Now there was a kink in the hose at this time which I did end up fixing. You'll see that in a later video. After that was finished, I removed what I call the door opener handle. Some of these bolts were a pain to get because you couldn't get a wrench or a socket on them, so I had to resort to a pair of vice grips. There was a cable hooked into the back of the bracket, and it took me a bit to figure out how to get it out. I just had to loosen the set screw and it popped right out. This cable ran to the outside of the bus and basically allowed the driver to lock the door from the driver's seat. Now I didn't want to do this, but I ended up removing the housing around the gearshift lever because I needed access to things that were in behind it. I then removed the passenger side lower windshield panel, which I later learned was hollow and functioned as the windshield defrost ducting. I removed the door release handle, which that cable I mentioned earlier was hooked up to. Here you see me removing the main gauge cluster. The panel itself was pretty badly cracked and I ended up making a new one, but you'll see that in a later video. I then removed the other lower windshield panel, which you can see the hose connected to. The heater actually pushed air through these plastic tubes and onto the windshield through small slits. It's a rather interesting system which I plan to replicate. After that, I temporarily reattached the gauge cluster so that it wouldn't be in the way. And that's it for this video. By the way, if you enjoyed this content, I would greatly appreciate it if you could like this video and subscribe to this channel. It's by no means necessary, but I am trying to grow this channel so that I can bring you more adventure content. so any support you can give would be greatly appreciated. I also have a second channel. It's called Cinebeam, and it mostly focuses on gaming content. So if you're into that sort of thing, feel free to give it a look. Thank you so much for watching, enjoy your day, and I'll see you next time.